In this episode of the Toolbox, I'm going to build a layout using Pollen, a variable-based CSS library that uses custom properties, otherwise known as variables. Now, we'll combine Pollen with Alpine.js, which makes setting up a data-driven project super easy. It's Wednesday, October 13th, and this is episode 8 of the Toolbox. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. This is Ravi Jalobos, and I stream about front-end and full-stack tools Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and 10 a.m. Pacific. So follow me and subscribe on all the social media things for a lot more content. Now, if you want to watch any past episodes, make sure you take a look at my blog, which is rabo.org. You can find all the past episodes there, and everything has links to everything that I'm talking about. So if you miss anything, that's a great place to catch up with what I'm doing, as well as my courses and anything else that I have going on. So I have been gone for a few weeks, just trying to catch up with some work projects. Make sure that if you have any questions, you can add them to the comments. As I'm going through the demo, I'll go ahead and pause and then take some of the questions and pop them up if they work out for helping everybody else. So there's already some people on the chat, and let's get started with something that I call shorts. So shorts are tools that I think are worth bookmarking, stuff that sort of stood out in my mind. So there's a lot of cool stuff here, perhaps some of the things that I might do in a future episode. So the first one that I have is called Motion 1. So you can get to that at motion.dev. And the interesting thing about this is that it's an animation framework. So it's something like Greenstock, which is an amazing, fantastic. Like, I love Greenstock. But this is a lot tinier, and it's also hardware accelerated. So it tries to use hardware acceleration whenever possible. And that means that it's going to deliver super responsive animations, even when there's like a heavy workload involved in the background. So let's go ahead and switch out the focus here so you can see more of it. So you can see that you can do all kinds of stuff. You have a timeline, keyframes, all kinds of springs. And yeah, it's going to be, I think, something that I may cover. If you guys want me to cover something, send me a link to some cool thing that you want me to cover. I think this one I'm thinking that I might go into at some point because it is so cool. All right, another one that I thought was pretty awesome And originally, when I planned out this, this demo that I'm going to do, I wanted to do everything in CSS Grid, and then I started using Grid, and I got a little bit frustrated because it's like a lot of code for just creating a simple layout. So I actually went back to Flexbox, and I love this site called Flexbox Patterns. So you can go in here and find sort of a pattern that you're looking for. So let's try this stepper input, and it's just going to give you the code for creating that using Flexbox. I think Flexbox is definitely better for some things, and I'm very familiar with it. And whenever I get into Grid, I'm like, what happens when this thing becomes responsive? So I'm probably just not experienced enough with it. I need to go watch Morton's course to see if I can catch up with all the coolness that is CSS Grid. Lastly, before I get into my demo for today, there's another really interesting library that I saw. And again, maybe it's something that I will cover later. And this is called, I'm not really sure actually what it's called, but I'm going to say it's Apropos.js. I'm going to go for that. It's one of those things that you don't really think that you need it until you check out what it does. And what's cool is it's like a 3D touch-enabled library for building parallax transformations. So pretty awesome. Looks pretty simple to use and also to install. So maybe this will be a great future little episode. I feel like I'm doing these things to try to go through the pain of checking some of these things out. And for a lot of these, I am trying to give you some resources to go with them. So the demo that I'm doing today, I have created a code swing. So actually, this is actually a code swing that you can get to. So if you wanted, for example, to follow along with me today, and I'm going to go pretty fast, so I don't expect you to follow along. Some of it is edited, so you'll be able to see that I'm going pretty fast. But you can, if you want to see the finished version of what we're going to be building, you can go to this URL. This is as I mentioned, a code swing. So this is live code that you can edit. So if I take this logo out, you'll see that it's way too big. And you can just go to that URL and start playing yourself with the framework. And I'll go through how I set up some of this. And in addition to that, I have a URL for sort of a beginning version of this. This is actually just a GitHub repo. So notice that with Code Swing, I can actually use github.dev and pull up one of my repos and then use any branch in that repo. So I can pull up a different branch by just typing it in here. So I think the other branch is called Start. And Start is just essentially the entire project without any code in it other than the setup files. Now you do have to have this thing called Code Swing installed, which is a Visual Studio Code extension. So you can see here that here's all the files, here's the data that we have in this project. It's a great way to practice with your code and point out that this is actually a repo, and you can do this with most repos, especially if they don't require any processing, and actually give somebody a link to different branches, and then they can play around with your setup all ready to go on everything. So you are going to need, as I mentioned, a plugin that it's going to be Code Swing, and you can just find it by going to in Visual Studio Code. If you go to your extensions, you can look for Code Swing, or just type in Code Swing in Google and you can get to it. I think I had a link for that somewhere, but I don't see it anymore. So let's go ahead and hide this link. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the kind of main event. Actually, let me see if there's any questions before I get started. So there is no such thing as being late. Somebody said, let's take a look at some of the comments. So Miyako, there is no such thing as being late. And you can always catch this on the replay. If you just go to rabo.org, I store all of them right there. What's nice is I usually create an article. So if you go to rabo.org, you can see that there is already an article for this project that I'll be doing today. And if this actually is the YouTube version of the stream, so if you played that, it would play the YouTube version of the stream. The nice thing is that this has the links to everything that I'm talking about. Yeah, so you can get links to everything that I mentioned in the show. So let's see. There are lots of hellos. So hello, Andrew. Hello, let's see, Sylvain. And hello, Jackie. Good to see you. And Peter, looks like Peter's usually here every time I stream, but he looks like he's a little bit busy. It just like me last week. For a couple of weeks, I just couldn't get into anything else. I just had to. I'm creating a new series, and I just had to abandon everything except for what I'm working on. So I totally understand that. All right, so let's get into Alpine, or actually Pollen. So Pollen is this super interesting library. I'm always happy when I'm learning new things. So I keep finding interesting libraries that I love. And I found this one called Pollen. And there's really nothing like giving yourself a goal, like a live stream to make yourself learn something. So this is part of the reason I'm doing this, is just so that I make myself have a schedule to learn something I'm interested in. So I am, like I mentioned, pre-recording some of these. But I promise that I'll stop to see if people have any questions. So if you notice anything, just let me know. So this is essentially a variable-based CSS library that actually was inspired by one of my other favorites, Tailwind CSS. It's a lot simpler. And as a matter of fact, it's really just a bunch of CSS variables that have been pre-built. So notice there's the different modules for typography, layout, colors, and essentially it just pre-creates these different variables and gives you a scale so that you can consistently design things that are related to each other. And then you can also override any of these variables. So I'm going to show you how to do that. It doesn't really have a ton of functionality. And as a matter of fact, it just links to a variable definition file. I think it might be good if it's something that you look at the defaults and modify yourself as a starter sort of template for a website that has a bunch of variables. I think I would use this if I wasn't interested in using something like Tailwind. Tailwind does add a ton of different of different classes. Like, it really pollutes your HTML quite a bit, and some people really don't love that. So this is, I think, what I would use if I wasn't focused on having a ton of those classes, although I really do love Tailwind. And you'll see how I use this with Alpine.js in a minute. So let's get into the demo. So to get started, I've created this code swing. There's also a data.json file that you can see right here. Let's see, we'll just put it over here. And you can see that it has just the data for the website. I have an image folder right here that has all the images that I'm going to need. This is essentially an array of objects, and the objects are the different sort of menu sections. So this first one's called appetizers. It has a name, a description, and then an items array that has a bunch of different items with links to the photos and the prices and all that stuff. One last thing is that I am using CodeSwing, so there's a CodeSwing.json file, and that is automatically loading two things for me. It's loading Alpine.js as well as the styles from Pollen. So the first thing I'll do is add an image, and that is just going to load my logo. So that's going to be in the img folder, and it's called logo.png. And for the alt tag, I'll use Mex Santos logo here, and I'm going to give this a class. And so for this logo class, I'm just going to add some basic CSS here. Where Pollen becomes useful is by giving you all these variables that you can use where you would normally put CSS. And the nice thing about it is that because these are variables, they can be updated anytime. So if I wanted to, for example, do a maximum width, I could type max width 100% here, or I could use one of the pre-built variables. And then for max width, we could type in one of the other variables. So here we would be able to say something like size and then one of the pre-built sizes. All right, let's go ahead and move this interface around a little bit. I'm going to put this index.html file here, and then the CSS file right next to it, just so that I have a lot more room to work with things here on the left. Let's go ahead and save these. And that's pretty much how you use the library. You just use the variables that they provide for you. And what they have done essentially is just create a number of variables that you might use or might create yourself often. And it gives you the ability to easily modify those either through just regular JavaScript or regular CSS. So that's pretty much all there is to it. However, I am going to go deep and actually build that layout from scratch. But before I get into that, I'm going to show you how I set up this project with Alpine.js. I didn't want to create a bunch of kind of HTML. And last week, I covered this Alpine.js library. So let's go ahead and pull up the website so you can see what I'm talking about. So yeah, Alpine.js happens to be at, let's see, alpinejs.dev. And essentially, what I love about this library is that there's only like 23 things to learn. There's only 15 attributes, 6 properties, and 2 methods. So you can actually, it makes it super simple to bring in data and then build a layout for something like this that's a demo. It works super, super well. Like I said, I did mention that I did do a little bit of a different demo in episode 7. So you may want to go ahead and check that out. You can take a look at it right here if you want to. So it's really easy. You start off by declaring the part of your code that you want to be controlled by Alpine.js, and all you do is add a script tag. There's no build tools, no complicated setup, just a script tag, and then it gives you all this super powerful abilities that are kind of like Vue.js, but it's even simpler than Vue.js. It doesn't get into a lot of super complicated stuff. So let's take a look at how I worked, or how I set up the project that I'm working on using Alpine. I'm going to go into my HTML and start working with Alpine. So what I'm going to do is create a div with a class of menu, and that's where my menu items are going to go. And what you do with Alpine is you create any data that you want into an X data attribute. Interestingly enough, any kind of prefix of X dash is valid HTML, so pretty interesting. And then in here you just put in any variables that you want to bring in. So what I'm going to create is just a variable that's going to be an empty array, because it's going to be the list of information that I'm going to bring in. And I'm going to put that in X data. And then I'm going to use xinit to initialize that data variable. So I'm going to make an assignment here. I'm going to say data is going to be equal to, and then I will use a couple of await functions to bring in the data using the fetch API. So we'll say await fetch find the data. So let's make sure we put a quotation there. Find the data, and then add data.json. Right, let's close out the single quote, and then the 2 parentheses, and then we'll convert this to JSON using JavaScript's JSON function. And that will allow me to bring in my data in JSON format, and it will now be available into my project. The other thing that xdata does is that it initializes this section of your HTML as sort of an Alpine.js component. So now I can use any of Alpine commands in order to bring in the data. Now to do that, I'm going to need a template. And my template is going to be a loop. So I'm going to say x4. And I'm going to call, since I have essentially 3 categories of menu items, I'm going to say category in data. So and then in here I'm going to create a div with a, let's see, a class of column, right, like this. And then in here I can start sort of working with my template. I'm going to have another div with a class of category name, right? And here is where I can start typing in some of the data that I've received from my JSON document. So this could say here X text. So this is how I insert text into a template. So I say X text equal and then category dot name. So you can see now that I have the category names from the data.json file. So if you remember, the data.json has 3 different categories, and right now I'm querying for the name. So that is pretty amazing. So in addition to the name, I'm also going to bring in the description. I'll just make a copy of this one and type in category description here. And now we have the name and the description as well. And then what I want to do is add a group of cards. So to do that, I'm going to add a card group class here. So I'm going to say I want to use a template here. I'm going to use X4, which is how Alpine allows you to go through a list of elements. And then in here, item and category items. So I'm going to go through the list of items in here. In this template, a class of card, or a div with a class of card, an image with a class of card image. So you can see it typing it in there already. And let's see. Now I need a source attribute, and for that I can do an X bind with a source attribute. So I'm going to say in here item.img, and then I'm going to use the thumbnails _tn.jpg, and I need to put this in quotes, right? So if you look at the data.json file, my image data object here has just the name of where the image is without the extension. And the images that I have like a high res and a low res version. The low res is called _tn.jpg, and that's where all that is coming from. So, and I believe that I don't need to put xbind. I could just put in :source like this, so you can use the shortcut for alt. I could just do the same thing, alt item title, and it'll get that alt tag as well. I usually like my classes to be kind of in the top, so I'll add that here. And now I'm going to type in a new div called card content. So here we'll do card title, and then here we'll do X text is going to be item title. So now we have the title of the items, and I'm just going to copy this a few times. Description. Right, one thing I do need to fix is this category name is in here twice. So this one should be category description. So I think Alpine would be perfect for a single page website, maybe not for a large application. I could be wrong. Maybe some people have built out like this super huge app, but it's pretty powerful, and I'm really just scratching the surface. There's really cool ways that you can manage events. So let's take a look at the website to show you. If we go to the docs here, you can see that there is a way to handle events. So you can do this X-on directive, which has a shortcut of this @ sign. And then whenever somebody does any sort of event, then you can have it do something directly in the HTML. And I think that's what's really kind of appealing. And that's why I say that this even Alpine itself is also inspired by Tailwind CSS, in that if you have Alpine and Tailwind, and that might be like a super cool combo to do a demo on at some point, you wouldn't even have to get into the CSS or the JavaScript. You would just do everything in HTML. Seems like a mess. But I think in projects like this, where you are using templates and you're using kind of the latest features of CSS and HTML, that might be a fantastic combo. There's also a lot of effects and transition X classes here. So I really want to dig in a little bit more into this. I don't know if there's enough interest for something like Alpine. It is fantastic for making demos or anything super quick. And I think it would be perfect for like a single page animation with some of the animation features, I think that it could be really good for any sort of animation project. And you're going to learn it so quickly because there's just not much to learn, and it's not very complicated. So I think that, I don't know, we may see either this library grow a little bit. Right now it's on version, I think, 2 or 3. So there's actually like a website here called Alpine component patterns. So that's interesting. So you can do all these things. Yeah, I really would like to see how you can do modal, because I was trying to do one earlier. And I couldn't figure out how to make it go like full screen. So that is pretty awesome. Let's get back into Pollen. In Pollen, the variables that you get are categorized into different groups. So you, for example, have like all these, they're over here under modules. So you have these typography modules, and it gives you like a pre-built scale that makes things that are related in size consistent. And it also makes it easier to customize things later, because you can change any of these variables, and I'll show you how to do that when I do the rest of the demo. Something that's peculiar, and you'll see this happen in my demo, is that you have like scale 0, which is 1 rem, which is the normal size for like text in a browser is 16 pixels. But then you have scale 00, and then scale 000, which is kind of fun. But then you have much bigger sizes. This is really meant for typography, this scale that you get here. But then you can also add a font sans, a font serif, a font mono, and it by default it gives you sort of the system fonts, but you can easily customize that if you want to. Then you have some classes for weights, as you can see here, and then some classes for leading and tracking, which is the spacing in between different characters. And then for layout, you have a couple of different size scales. You have an actual size scale, and it doesn't go very big. So I'm not sure why it only goes to 384 pixels. That seems a little narrow, super narrow, actually. And then you can do size full, size screen, size min, max. And you can also do widths, which actually are how you would get to anything a lot bigger. And these are like the sort of classes that you would get in Bootstrap or in Tailwind. They're kind of like the grid, quote unquote, classes. So they're just pre-built there for you. And again, super easy to modify. And I'll give you an example. Then you have all these classes for colors. The colors, you have essentially for every color, you have different versions of the color, which are 100, 300, 500, and 700. So you can go a little bit darker if you want to on the colors. And you have red, green, blue, pink, purple, indigo, teal, yellow, orange, brown. Not a ton of colors. I mean, I think that, and notice that there's nothing like color primary, secondary, like Bootstrap would give you, but you can easily, again, if you know how to use the root variable, you can create yourself those things. So it definitely feels very much bare bones, and it's really meant for if you're trying to build your own thing, if you want something to get you started quickly, I think. And there's like a couple of like other UI properties. Elevation, I think it's meant for like box shadows, but right now they weren't looking so great to me, so you'll see in my demo. And then there is some radius classes. These are pretty useful if you want to create sort of rounded edges or anything like that. And then some layers for stacking things with the framework. So pretty interesting. Let's take a look at the rest of my demo. So you'll see how I build the layout that I showed you step by step with Pollen CSS using what we built already in Alpine. Okay, hold on. I think I need to actually share this separately because I thought I had loaded it up in here. So let me just share this video. Give me a second here. The nitty-gritty of Pollen. I'll start off by creating a reset. So I'm going to do this with the star selector, which will select everything on the page. And I'm going to set the margin using the variable provided by Pollen to size 0. We'll do the same thing for padding. And then we'll set the font family to font sans. So it'll give us a nice sans serif font. And we'll set the font weight to font light. So it'll give us a lighter version of the fonts. And this is kind of how I like to start all my projects. All right, let's also set some defaults for the body. And here I can use the variable for color black. And then I'll set a background image. And use the background image from the image folder. All right, so let's keep on working on this. We'll work on the menu class next. So for this, we're going to use, we'll use a max width. And I'm going to set that to a variable called width XL. So this will be the width of the menu container. And then I'll also add a margin 0 auto to center that. So this is going to be this would be the mobile first layout. And as it gets smaller, it's eventually going to get to a size like this. So I also want to add a little bit of padding. And I'll use a size 5 that gives you a nice little space when the width of the container is pretty small. At the top of each column, I have a category name. I'll use a font weight here. And there's a bunch of font weight classes. So you can say font bold. For this one, though, I want font black, which is the darkest of all the variables that are available to me. Right, for color, I'm going to try color red here. And I want it to be a darker red. There are a bunch of different sort of versions of red, or the different colors that you can use. So 700 is the darkest one. And then I'll do font size. For that, I'm going to use a scale variable called 3. All right, let's do a couple of things for the description. So we have another class called category description here. Now for that, I'm just going to set the line height using one of the variables, actually some variables for leading, and I'll use the SM size for the leading. And then I'm going to add a little bit of margin at the bottom of these. That looks pretty good. The individual items have a class of card title. So for that, I'm going to use the orange color, and I'll leave it at 700. So I'm going to use the bold version of the font, and I'm going to use scale 2 here for the size. So I want it to be a little bit smaller than the headings. All right, card description. And I want these to be a little smaller. There's these sizes or these scales that actually are below 0. It's a little bit odd. So you can say 0, and then you can say 0, 0, which is smaller than 0. It's a little bit weird. Let's do the price. I'm going to make that green. Bold works pretty good here. And I'm going to align this to the right. So the prices don't have any dollar symbols, so we're just going to make that happen. And we'll use the before pseudo class selector here. And with content, we could just add a $sign that appears at the very top. So next up, let's work on our image. I'm going to put that over here. We'll use size 20 and give that to the width and height. Let's use a border radius, and it does come with a lot of variables for border radius here, so we can say radius LG here. Now it does have these variables for box shadows, but they don't work particularly well. They are very light box shadows. And actually what you do here, it's not shadow LG, but what you do is you define something called the elevation, and then you give it a number. And as you can see, it's not really looking like it does very much. So I'm going to show you that you can take any existing variable in the framework, and if you don't like how it looks, you can actually redefine it. That's one of the sort of powerful features of this. So I'm going to go over here to the very top, and in my root selector, which will be sort of everything that happens before any of my CSS loads, I'm going to say elevation 1 is now going to mean something else. 0 And then I can put in whatever I want here. 5 pixels, 10 pixels, and then RGB 000 slash 70%. And now you're getting a nice shadow. You're still using the language of the framework, but you can redefine any of the variables. So if you don't like the way that green looks, you can make it whatever green you want it to look, or if you don't like any of these other colors. It's pretty easy to do. All right, let's work on our layout just a little bit. So I'm going to do card group here. I'll say the display flex. I'm going to use the flex direction column so they're not side by side like that. And then I'm going to set up a gap here. And then, so we have a card group, and in addition to that, we have each individual card. So again, display flex and another gap here. And I'm going to set this to size 6 here. That aligns everything pretty good. It looks like a pretty decent menu already. Let's try some responsive content here. So I'm going to go back up here to the menu, and I'm going to add a media query here. And so I'm going to set the max width to none. So to see this, I'm going to go ahead and hide the sidebar and make this actually a lot wider. So this is what's going to happen when the menu gets pretty wide. So using display flex here is going to make each one of the items align into different columns like this. And I'm going to set the gap to a size of 8 so we get a little bit of room in between the different columns. Now I'm going to get a little fancy here and rotate some of the columns. So in here I'm going to rotate each of the different columns by -1.5 degrees. To get even fancier, I'm going to do something on every odd column. So I'll say end child. Instead of 2 here, I'll say odd. And so you get this nice little layout. Now, when it's a smaller size, it looks pretty good. And when it's a bigger size, it looks good as well. Let's go ahead and fix these gaps right here. So on my menu, I'm going to set it to display flex and set the flex direction to column. And then I will add a gap here with a variable of 5. And that will add these sort of gaps in between the different elements. It's going to give you that sort of space at this breakpoint, but it's still going to work at the larger breakpoint. And that's really Pollen for you. What do you think? Let me know in the comments if you liked it, if you think you would use it. I know that some people really are apprehensive about tailwinds, which is what I would normally use for this. Although this is so simple that it does make me think on a small project, especially when I'm doing a demo and I don't want to like load up a bunch of stuff, I might go for this. I think I'm like 55% sold right now. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Time will tell. I think that I am pretty sold on Alpine. You can see me going back to it when I'm doing these demos. So I think it's definitely something I'm going to use this one. I think it's a good starter project, but I'm not sure if it's something that I would totally use on the long term. Again, maybe on smaller things. Some people really hate how bloated something like Bootstrap or Tailwind feels, and they just want to stick with straight CSS. So this might be a good solution. Very little setup, absolutely no tooling. All you do is add a script tag. I think it's like 1.3 kilobytes, so it's ridiculously small. It's literally just a CSS file that has all the variables in it. And so if you don't even like that one, you can actually just take that one as a starting point and then make your own, and then still have like those scales, the colors that you use, maybe add a few more, I think would be good with some more. And so as long as you're targeting browsers that support variables, you're good to go with just a couple of script tags or a couple of like really a single link tag to the CSS. Yeah, let me know in the comments, and also let me know if there's any other cool new frameworks that you want me to try. I'm happy to try new things. So there's actually a couple of questions. How scalable? Super scalable. I think I would take it as a sort of beginning template. I'm curious to see where it goes from here. I would like to see a few more things added to it. I think that I definitely want more colors, maybe not so much more colors, but a little bit more of a scale in the colors section. What else could I really use? I don't know. I don't think I really had a problem doing a lot of things. I was missing some things like positioning properties. So I told you I was experimenting on doing a modal and I couldn't get it done. and it was really an Alpine problem. It wasn't a Pollen problem. But it doesn't have like display properties, but maybe you don't need those. Maybe you could just type those in. One thing I didn't show is that you can actually use those variables in style attributes. So you can completely treat this how you would use Tailwind CSS. You could just simply go into your HTML, and instead of using classes, just use the style tag, use the variable. Then there's going to be instances where you're going to need a few more things in there. So I think I like it. It's not hugely popular, so this is very much a emerging library. If you take a look at their GitHub repo right now, let's see. Let's take a peek. So right now it's only like 354 stars. I'm not even sure why I picked this one to try, but I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I think when something is different, it kind of catches my eye, and those are good things to try. And I guess I feel like I might as well try it. Maybe, you know, you can take a look at if it's something that you want to check out, and that way you only wasted my time. Like I've got plenty of time to try new things, and I really enjoy them. So yeah, let me know if you want me to play around, as I mentioned, with some specific framework. And if there's anything else you want me to cover, I showed a couple of them that I thought were pretty cool. That motion was pretty sweet. Apropos, you know, I think like with Apropos, I would have to have a reason to use it. I'd love to see, because it's supposedly touch enabled, I'd love to see how it works on my iPad, and see if it could be. A long time ago, I built like this dress up app using just straight up JavaScript. So maybe that could be something that I would play around with, and my kids could have a lot of fun with. Let's see. As I mentioned, I do have this as a repo. So if you want to play around, and I put the links whenever I was playing the recording, I put in the links to these. But this is the starting version of this. You can see that the link has the keyword start right here, and it does have a code swing with the libraries already loaded. So you can see that this is literally just a call to a CSS file, and I'm also loading up Alpine here. So if you just want to try it out, this is a good sort of template. If you go to a repo, so if you go to github.com, Planet of the Web, which is my GitHub account, and you go to repositories, you'll see that I have pre-built swings for different projects. So I have an Alpine swing, I have a Llama swing, which is kind of interesting. This is private. So modular swing, assembler CSS, which is another one that I tried. So you could just click on these. Let's see. So right now I was doing a swing pollen. Ignore this one. I'm going to delete this one. This is like an older version. So you can go in here, and then you just hit the period key, and it jumps into that code spaces that has all the stuff already done. But it's a little bit more convenient if you go to the different branches, and then you can just hit the period at that different branch, and it'll bring up the code when it's finished, for example. So let's see. This is going to be recorded, so if you want to play along with this later, you can definitely go, look at the starting version, or get the starting version of the code swing, and then watch the video and try to do it yourself. It's a lot of fun. It's not a very difficult library to play around with. So let's see. I've already scheduled a new Toolbox episode for next week. Actually, let me stop and see if there's any other questions on the chat before I keep on going. So there is something here. Let's see. Hello, CSS. I've seen that one. I'm going to write it down, and I'll play around with it this week. I've already scheduled the next episode, episode 9, but I have seen that one before. I don't know. Maybe it's cool. So we'll at least take a look at it. If you have any other ideas, let me know. It's in the chat, or just reach out to me on one of the social media places. And I love to try new things. Every time I do a the shorts segment, that's usually the things that I have seen that really pique my interest, and that's a lot of times where I pick stuff from. So if you want to, you can take a look at the next episode of the toolbox, I'm going to be playing around with something. I don't know if you've seen this build tool. I don't know if it's a framework or what you would call it, but essentially it's a build tool framework, I guess. I don't know. Tooling. It's like a tooling platform. So it's like a Node.js set of tools that allow you to has like HMR is the kind of killer feature that is hot module replacement that makes it really fast when you're working with components-based architecture. So this was actually invented by the team that develops Vue.js. And so it is really good. I've used it for other things. If you've seen my Reveal.js project, that one uses this. And so I'm just going to walk you through it and show you some of the things that I've learned after using it for a while. And if you want to sign up to that, let's see, do I have a, yeah, here's where you can, if you want to sign up to the, to my, to the next episode, you can go to that URL and just get a reminder for the Vita or Vit. I think it's pronounced Vit. I don't know. I'll know how to pronounce it by next week. So yeah, it should be pretty cool. Also, I'm back to writing articles. I did an article that I'm super proud of. So if we go, let's go to LinkedIn and we'll take a look at views of the post article. So I have this series of articles that are under the what you call it, this section called Apply for Web Developers. I have 15,000 subscribers. Wow, I'm pretty impressed with myself there. So I did this article. I was born in Panama, and I did this article about Roberto Duran, who won his fourth title at age 37. And I talk about some of the things that I'm on. I should have a new article this Thursday. So check that out. Let's see, anything else? And also, I always want to mention that you can go to rabo.org to get anything. One of the cool features of the site is that it does have a search tool. So if you see something mentioned on one of these shows, so for example, if you remember, oh, there's this library and it was like about motion. So you could just do a search right here, powered by Vue.js, as a matter of fact, and then it'll take you to that website. So it's a quick way. If you see one of the Toolbox shorts and you remember where did I see that, then just go to rabo.org and you can do a search there with whatever I mentioned in one of the shows. And there's already, like I mentioned, an article here on this building a website with Pollen and Alpine. I'll probably build it out a little bit later on, but you can see all the links. Looks like this Motion 1 graphic is not loading up, so I'll fix that up and clean it up a little bit. I just wanted to have it ready for the show. So that's all that I have. Let's take a look at any comments that I have in the chat. So ask me anything. Vit, evidently Vit is French. So I listened to it being pronounced, and I can't, what did it mean? Because I did remember looking at what it meant. So look, thank you, Sylvain. It means fast. Yeah, it is, I can attest, it is super fast, especially when you have like a big project. And I don't know if anybody else has used it, but it's really my go-to tooling platform. I love Vue.js anyways. Vue.js is my favorite framework. So I immediately dug in, and that ability to do hot module replacement is something that's been coming up in a lot of tooling platforms. So I was really interested in it, and I was pretty much immediately sold on Vit. So we'll play around with it next week. I don't see anything else. So hopefully you got some value out of this. Again, connect with me. Let me know in the comments, and I will talk to you again next week.